Hello BookTube, my name is Elizabeth. Welcome back to my channel, Book as in Books. I am filming from a slightly different location than usual. That location is the floor, in front of a sofa. I know, sofas are meant to be sat on, not in front of, but I'm surrounded by piles of books. In September, there was the event called Shorty September, where we were invited to read short books. And what I did at the beginning, well, before the month began, was to go to my TBR and look for every book that I had that was under 250 pages. I took him out and it became my pile of possibilities for Shorty September. In October, there's an event that is called Doorstopper Doom, and it is hosted by Kitty Von Reeds and by Anne Novella. I will leave links in the description box below to their announcement videos. And it is, as you may guess, about reading long books. There are 3 levels to the challenge, I guess. So level 1 is to read the longest book you have on your TBR. You don't have to finish it, you just start to read it in October and you're part of the challenge. Number 2, level 2, is to read 2 books that are at least 700 pages long. Level 3 is to read 10 books that are 500 pages long, at least, of course. And I thought that was super interesting. Fall for me is the time for long books. I don't know why. I feel in the mood for long books in the fall. I think there's an event that should be called Longtober, where you just read long books. Long November doesn't sound as good, but it would work too. Longvember, it would work too. But anyway, I decided to go to my TBR and look for every book that I had that was at least 500 pages long. And that's going to be my pile of possibilities for the month of October. Well, not just for that, for Doorstopper Doom, because I also have a Victober pile of possibilities, and there are some books that are in both pile of possibilities because the Victorians were good at writing long books. Without further ado, I'm going to start showing you the books. I'm going to start with a non-fiction. No, it's not true. I'm going to start with fiction and then I'll go to non-fiction, and the fiction is more or less in chronological order, very, very approximate. So I'm just going to show you the book and tell you the number of pages. I'm not going to try to explain the synopsis or how I got the book or whatever, because we'd be here for a little while. So, and at the end there will be perhaps a reckoning of some sort that I have an addiction to big book. We'll see. Stay tuned. If you could see the pile of books around me, it's beautiful. So book number 1, Delphine by Madame de Stael. It is, I have a list in front of me, 984 pages. Bleak House by Charles Dickens. This one is a very thin 818 pages. But the writing, oh good grief, it's so teeny tiny. The print is just so small. Next, another Dickens at 886 pages, the Pickwick Papers. I think I should hold the book here for the light. I think it's better. Is it good? Both are bad. It's not good for lighting this place. All the lighting comes from above my head, but anyway, you don't care for that. You're here for the books, right? Right. 4th book on my list, The Charterhouse of Parma by Stendhal. It's 625 pages. As you can see, there's a bookmark in it. You're going to see bookmarks in quite a few books. I have a tendency to start a book and then after 200 pages, I sort of lose interest. I don't know why, and it's not because of the book. It's just that my reading brain is a toddler. It needs variety, it needs to be entertained. Unless I sort of force it to continue to read a book, I will very often be tempted to read something else after 200 pages. So long books are more susceptible to being just slowly, gently put aside. So that's what happened to this one. And also, technically, I've already read that one. So this one is a reread for me. However, I'm including it in my TBR, in my pile of books that I have not read yet, because since I've bought the copy, I have not reread it. So this copy to me is like a new book. So that's why it's on my TBR, even though in theory, I've already read The Charterhouse of Parma. And other French classics, there are quite a few. Notre Dame, The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo. This edition is 508 pages long. We are staying in France with my favorite writer, Zola. This one is L'Assomoir. I forgot to check what the title was in English. I suppose that I can put it in the description box below. This one is, how many pages? I've already forgotten. I have a list. 504, so it just barely qualifies. And I know that I started reading that one several years ago when I got it, and I stopped after probably 200 pages. I don't have a bookmark, but I stopped after a little while because I could feel it becoming dark. I think it's one of the darkest books by Zola, and I could feel it becoming very depressing, and I guess I was not in the mood for that. So it remains unread in its entirety. I've read a bit. Another Zola, The Downfall. This one is 582 pages. This one is about the war in 1870 between France and Prussia, I think. A French classic that I've had for I don't know how many years, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Vernes. This one is 616 pages. Yeah, I don't know why I've never read it. I think the print is not that bad and there are images in there, so it should be an easy read, but I've never read it yet. Next, we are moving to England. Though we are still in the 19th century, Barchester Towers by Anthony Trollope. This book is 551 pages long. Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. This edition is 527 pages long. Middlemarch by George Eliot. This edition is 814 pages long. I'm going to read this for Victober. At least I'm going to attempt it. I don't know how successful I will be, but at least I'm going to try. So I may have one book less to read at the end of October. Now we are moving into the 20th century. This is the third volume in Marcel Proust In Search of Lost Time. However, I cannot read this one first. I have to read the second one first, and the second one didn't make the cut for this video because it's 597 pages in the edition that I have, but with extremely tiny font, you know. And this one is 603 pages, and I know that many editions of this one run at way over 800 pages, but this one is in 600 pages. Evelyn Waugh, Sword of Honor, 663 pages. Vasily Grossman, Stalingrad. This is another one that I started and somehow abandoned after about 200 pages. And this one is 1,050 pages long. And it's not the longest book on my TBR. The longest book in this video is this one. This is Belle du Seigneur. Again, I forgot to check what the title in English was. It is by Albert Cohen, and it is 1,100 pages long. The print is, well, the usual folio print, which is not very generous, so quite a tiny print. Next, a historical novel, Colleen Mccullough, The First Man in Rome. This one is 931 pages. If I look at the last page number, it would be 1072, but there are quite a few annexes. There's a glossary, there's a list of names, a list of table of pronunciation. There's a whole bunch of things at the end that I figured it's not something I'm going to read line by line, so it doesn't really count. So I decided it was 931 pages. Jonathan Coe, What a Carve Up. This one is 679 pages. Umberto Eco, The Cemetery of Prague. This one is 567 pages. That's another one with a bookmark way past the middle. The bookmark is at page 310, so it's past the middle. But I found it quite boring. I was expecting something completely enthralling, and I did not find it enthralling, so I sort of abandoned it after 300 pages. If I were to read it again, to pick it up again, I would have to start from the beginning. I might as well just remove the bookmark. Hey, that's it. No bookmark anymore, because it was at least 5 years ago that I read that, started to read that. So, a brand new book, Umberto Eco. Roberto Bolano, The Savage Detectives. I don't know, it's another one. I didn't check the title in English. I remember I checked it a long time, well, for a previous video, but I forgot it. And this one is 930 pages. This one is quite different from the others. The Black Echo by Michael Connolly. This one is a thriller. I think it should read rather fast. It's 508 pages, so among the shortest books in this pile of possibilities. And it's full of dialogues, and the pages are not that big and not that full, so it should read quite quickly, this one. This book is not translated in English. It is translated from the Swedish. If I translate the title word for word, it is Never Wipe Tears Without Gloves. It is is 824 pages. And the bookmark in this one is at page 200, and it's not because I put it away, it's because I started it yesterday. It's really, really good, so I'm reading it currently. Maybe by the end of October, by the end of September, I will already have read it, so it will not even be a candidate for Doorstopper Doom in October, but I just wanted to show the book. It's quite big, but it reads super well. It's really, really good. It's about the AIDS crisis in Sweden in the 1980s, and so far it's really, really good. So I hope for you that it's going to be translated in English, but at the moment it isn't. This is a French-Canadian novel, a Quebecois novel. It is, the title in English is October 1970, a novel. It is 593 pages. So this is a fictional account of the October crisis. And this video is going to be too long if I try to explain what the October crisis is, but it's an important event that happened in 1970, in October 1970. Now I'm thinking of it, I should read this in October. I should read this in October. I'm going to think about it. Next, a book that I bought this year because it has been translated in English. It is M, Son of a Century by Antonio Scurati, and the French version is 861 pages long. But that's going to read, I think, quite easily because the pages are far from being full. There are a lot of breaks, and yeah, I think this is going to read very, very well. I've started it in May. I had borrowed a copy from the library. I had read about 180 pages or something like that, and I had to bring it back. So I figured I'm just going to buy a book so that I can read it at my own rhythm. So that's why I have it. A book translated from the Catalan. This is Confessions by Jaume Cabrera. As you can see, I've started to read it, and as you can see, I've stopped reading it. And I did that twice. It's another one of these books that for some reason I failed to connect with them after about 200 pages. So this one is 772 pages. And I'm going to read it. Because I remember when I bought this book, full price, $39.95. I wanted to read it so bad. So it's not normal that like almost 10 years later, it's still there unread. I want to read it, except that I just don't want to read it. But I want to read it. I'm going to read it at some point. That was the last of my fiction books. Now we are going into nonfiction, and I need to move some books around. So just hold on one second. So the first in nonfiction, which actually is a good transition, it is Papillon by Avi Sharier. It is 599 pages long, and it's a good transition because half of it is just pure fiction. So I say half, I don't know what the percentage is, but there's a good deal of fiction in this. So it's nonfiction technically because it's sold in the nonfiction section, but 599 pages. 851 pages, this biography of the Cardinal de Richelieu by Philippe Erlanger. I think this is an interesting character. I want to read more about this figure of history, but I haven't read it yet. A book that you certainly know, Nelson Mandela, A Long Walk to Freedom. However, I have it in French. It's 756 pages long, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I'm thinking it's ridiculous to read this in French. I'm not going to hear the voice of Mandela in French. If I read it in English, I'm going to sort of hear his voice in my head. So I'm thinking about sort of unhauling this book and getting it in English instead. But for the moment, I have it on my pile of possibilities in French at 756 pages. The first volume of Chateaubriand's, what's the title again in English? Memories from Beyond the Graves? Memoirs from Beyond the Graves, something like that. It's the first volume, and it is 747 pages long. T. Lawrence, The Seven Pillars of Wisdom. This French version is at 894 pages long. This mysterious book that I don't even know what it's about, Gödel Escherbach by Douglas R. Hofstadter. This one is 742 pages long. And yeah, winner of the Pulitzer Prize. This won the Pulitzer Prize, and I have no idea what it's about. A book that is not translated in English. This one is a volume 2 of a volume 1 that I haven't read, but I don't think I need to read it. It's making links between music and other forms of art in the 19th century and 20th century. So with painting, sculpture, and architecture, perhaps, I don't know. So this one is 695 pages. The shortest book of this video, Putin's People by Catherine Belton. It is exactly 500 pages long. Maybe I should have said it before starting the nonfiction section. I did not include the index, the appendices, or whatever. I just counted the number of pages of the text itself. Because otherwise there would be way more nonfiction on this pile of possibilities. But with just the text itself, this one is 500 pages long. Another book about music, A Sound Mind by Paul Morley. This one is 573 pages long. Margaret Macmillan, The War That Ended Peace, 675 pages long. And finally, the last book on this TBR, Dreadnought by Robert K. Massey at 908 pages. It is, I believe, my longest non-fiction. So that's it. That's all the books that I have unread that are at least 500 pages long. That's a total of, let's have fun with numbers, 17,614 pages of fiction and 7,910 pages of non-fiction for a grand total of 25,524 pages for 35 books. So 25,000 pages. Last year, according to Goodreads, I read 42,000 pages. And Goodreads includes in their count all the indexes, and in nonfiction in particular, there can easily be 100 pages of words that I just will not necessarily read. I may refer to them, but I won't necessarily read all the endnotes and all the index and all the table of content and everything like that. So it's likely under that. The number of pages that I read is probably more around 40,000. Well, 41,000? Well, okay, let's say 42,000, like they said. So 25,000, that means that I would need at least 7 months just to read that. If I read nothing else, I would need 7 months to read these books. And I know that's not going to happen. I know I'm not going to stop reading other books. And if I said, okay, I'm going to read one a month, I'm going to need 3 years to read that. If I read 2 a month, it's going to be a year and a half. I guess it's doable, a year and a half. But that would mean that I will not buy other books that are at least 500 pages long, which it does not seem reasonable because obviously I do love big books. So I have a problem. I have a math problem. I have too many long books. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to take part in Doorstopper Doom. I'm not going to read 10 books that are at least 500 pages because that's 5,000 pages in a month and that's just way more than I read. I don't have time for that, unfortunately. But what I'm going to do is that I'm going to give priority to the books that are 500 pages long or longer until the end of the year. So until the end of December, my priority will be big books. So that means that at the end of the month, I may have just 4 or 5 books to talk about because I read a whole bunch of 800 pages books. But I'm going to live with that. Yeah, and I'm saying it's not going to be exclusively that because you can probably guess that it's lacking in a lot of variety. There's not a lot of variety in there. There's very few genre fiction. There's one thriller, no mysteries, no romance, no anything like that. So that's bound to be a little bit boring. The nonfiction does not have a lot of variety because it has only 11 titles, so that's not a lot. And I have a whole bunch of other books on hold at the library. They will probably all arrive at the same time in November, December. That's what happened last year. I ended up with like 5 or 6 books to read in 3 weeks because other people had put hold on them. So I had to bring them back after 3 weeks, and I had to bring back some unread to the library. I think it's going to happen again this year. So anyway, regardless, all of this to say that I have a whole bunch of books that are 500 pages and longer, and that my objective for Doorstopper Doom will be challenge number 2, which will be to read 2 books that are at least 700 pages long. One of them is going to be Middlemarch, and the other one, I don't know. I'm thinking it's going to be the Mussolini one, probably, but who knows? It could be something else. And I'm going to give priority to books that are at least 500 pages long until the end of the year. Little personal challenge to me. So that's it. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope you are enjoying your big books or your small books or your average books. I hope you're enjoying your books. And let me know in the comments, do you like big books or do you think they're intimidating or do you get bored? Is your reading brain a toddler like mine? Anyway, thanks for watching. I will see you in the next video. À la prochaine!